In this lecture, we're going to be looking at media representations of gender, and we're going to be focusing mostly on the representation of women, as that is where most of this research has been done. However, we will also dive into the representation of men, transgender and non-binary people as well. We're going to be looking at how women are, and men and non-binary transgender people are shown in the media, the stereotypes that are perpetuated, and we'll be looking at particularly the concept of symbolic annihilation. We'll finish off the lecture by looking at the theoretical perspectives on gender representation and why it is that the media represents the genders in this particular way. So let's get started by looking at media representations of women. Now, the first study we're going to look at is called the Just Women Report, which was released in September of 2012, and it was a content analysis of 11 national newspapers in the UK and their content over the course of 2 weeks. And their findings found that generally the way women were perceived in these newspapers was often misrepresenting them and presenting harmful myths and stereotypes that were causing mental health issues and women to have body issues and all of these things, rather than showing the true experience of being a woman in the UK today. They also found that the media perpetuated the double victimization of women. So when women were victims of a crime, they were portrayed in a way that made them culpable in that crime. They were the cause of that criminality, and it created excuses for the men who had perpetuated the crimes against the women, or even other women that had done the crime against them. A good example of this came out just after Christmas, where a lead cyclist from, I want to say South Africa, but I'm not sure if it was, murdered his wife on New Year's Day. Now, she was also a world ranking cyclist, but the media's representation of this crime was world record or world medalist cyclist apparently kills wife on New Year's Day. He shot her. There's no apparently, he shot her and he was arrested. But the way the media presented it was as him as the lead sports person in the relationship, and she was just the wife. We also see it with women who come forward with rape allegations and sexual assault allegations, because they are then portrayed as being the cause of that act against them. There's also a massive focus in these newspapers on women's appearance. Who's wearing what? Doesn't matter if you are Prime Minister, President, member of the royal family, celebrity, or what. Newspapers will be interested in what you are wearing and which designer or where you got your clothing from, rather than the substance of what it is that you are doing. And there is the pornified material, the page 3 girls, the bikini clad or topless women that are throughout the media, which continues the objectification of women and the reduction of who they are to sexual commodities. And this creates a systematic sexism across the national press, negatively impacting women's participation in public life. Nicola Sturgeon, when she was still First Minister of Scotland, is quoted as saying that when she's in the press, it's often talking to her about what she's wearing, what clothing she's wearing, who her partner is, what's going on in her life, rather than her role as First Minister of Scotland, And that's putting girls and women off from going into politics, into national politics, because they're not going to be judged on what they say or their policies or what they do. They're going to be judged on how they look. And many of these women, when they do things that people don't agree with, unlike their male counterparts, they are the ones that are subjected to threats of sexual violence, threats of actual violence, threats against their family. So this systematic sexism in the national press regarding women, particularly women in power, leads to other women not wanting to access these areas because they're scared. But this is not a new phenomenon. In 1980, Marjorie Ferguson published a book called Women's Magazines and the Cult of Femininity. And in her study, she conducted an analysis of women's magazines from the end of World War II to 1980. So we're talking over 40 years worth of women's magazines. And she found that everything that was put into these magazines was organised around what she referred to as the cult of femininity, this idea of what it means to be feminine. So she found 6 key areas where almost all the content of these magazines focused. It was around this idealised womanhood. What is the perfect woman and how to become her? Consumerism, what you should be buying, what clothes should you be wearing, what makeup should you be having, what gadgets should you have in your kitchen. It reinforced traditional gender roles of being the wife, the mother, the traditional woman. There's a complete lack of intersectionality. It is representing a white Western middle class view of femininity, of what a woman should be like. It's not looking at the realities of working class women, ethnic minority women, or LGBTQA plus women. Now obviously this was the 1980s where attitudes were slightly different, particularly towards LGBTQA plus women, but it was still perpetuating this middle class white Western myth of what it means to be a woman. It was telling women that they needed to be passive and dependent upon the men in their lives, and it talks about emotionalism, that women again creating this idea that women are overly emotional and how they should manage this emotionality. So this representation of women in these magazines was very much stereotypical of what society wanted women to be. And in the 1970s, Gay Tuckman and her team used the term symbolic annihilation to describe women's experiences with the media or within the media. And what they mean by the term symbolic annihilation is the absence of representation, the underrepresentation of groups in the media, in this case, women. And Tuckman broke down this symbolic annihilation into 3 areas: the omission, condemnation, and trivialization of women's experiences. And we're going to look at these individually to kind of see what that means and how this is achieved by media. And remember, by media we're talking about magazines, newspapers, television, radio, music, movies. So all these areas of and how they omit, condemn, and trivialize women's experiences. So we'll start off with trivialization. And the key area of trivialization is the limited roles that women play in the media. And Tunstall in 2000 identified 4 roles that women generally have within the media. They are the wife, the mother, the whore, or the bitch. And in all areas of media, we can see this. Women are relegated to being the wife of. And you can have people who have, or women who have the most amazing contributions, but they're the wife of somebody. It was quite interesting, a recent awards event, or Kennedy Lifetime Achievement Award, or something like that. George Clooney was being given this Lifetime Achievement Award, and it was supposed to be comedic, but it was quite an apt description that Tina Fey, I think it was Tina Fey, it may have been Amy Poehler, one or the other, was doing the introduction to George Clooney and why he was getting this award. And she did it in a way where she talked about his wife Amal, who is an international lawyer. She is a human rights lawyer. She works on charities to get girls in education. She protects human rights around the world. She's done international war crimes trials as a prosecutor, and for once, instead of it being that this woman was the wife of George Clooney, whoever it was, whether it was Amy Poehler or Tina Fey, whoever it was kind of saying, tonight we're here to recognise the work of and all these things about Amal Clooney, and she's like, but the award tonight is going to her husband George. But generally it is the other way round. Women are referred to as the wife of. They're also relegated to, in many roles, as the mother. They don't have a job, or their job is secondary to their motherhood. Anything else they do is secondary to their motherhood. You often see Angelina Jolie, award-winning actress, humanitarian, charity worker, referred to as Angelina Jolie, mother of 6, rather than all the other achievements that she's accrued. You then get the women who are sexualized and portrayed in a whore type manner, and these women often, I think a good example here, she wasn't actually called a whore, but Taylor Swift, in one of her speeches for, I think it was Woman of the Decade, she pointed out that she was denigrated and reduced to who she was dating rather than her musical achievements, and she was told she was dating too much as a 20-year-old woman, so she stopped doing it. But then she wasn't dating enough, and her sex life was up for media consumption as to who was she seen with, are they dating? Okay. And the bitch format usually comes out with characters or women who reject the role of wife and mother. The career women who don't want to get married or don't want to have children and focus on their careers. They're seen as bitches. They're seen as cold and heartless because they've ignored the traditionally accepted roles that women have. And this trivialization particularly commodifies women, turns women into a sexual commodity. The media overly focuses on women's appearances, and this appearance is something that is to be consumed by men, and what Mulvey refers to as the male gaze. We're in red carpet season with the Oscars and things like that. Every single woman is going to be asked, what designer are you wearing? None of the men are being asked that about their tuxes. And I remember a few years ago, it was quite a few years ago now, the comedian Sarah Mulligan went to an award ceremony, And she was on the red carpet, and they went, "Oh, and what designer are you wearing this evening?" She went, "George by Asda." Because she'd just gone to the shop and got herself a nice dress that she liked. And she was ridiculed for it. She was called names for what she was wearing. You never see that said about men. So women's role in the media is to look good, according to Mulvey, for the male gaze. Kilborn builds on this and talks about women as mannequins. In fictionalized media, in TV, in books, in music videos, you see women as tall, thin, with perfect skin, teeth and hair. They're usually a size 0. They've got long legs, they're well dressed, they're walking Barbies. And they're there to look good. Now, this is particularly relevant to music videos, and Bates in 2014 talks about this in the sense that when you see women in music videos, they are over-sexualized and they are hyper-sexualized. So it's kind of, women in the media are walking Barbies rather than well-rounded individuals who have something to say. And Wolf says that this sexual commodification of women means that they are presented as a constant project for improvement. There's always something. You could be skinnier, you could be fitter, you could be this, you could be that. You should be working on this. There's the speech in the new Barbie movie done by America Ferrara as character, who talks about this contradiction of terms. You should be happy with who you are, but you should also want to be improving yourself. You should be this, you should be that, and it's that constant contradiction and that constant project for improvement. And finally, it's the language that is used around women in the media. Duncan and Mesner did an analysis of the language used when talking about female athletes during the 2012 Olympics. And no, not the 2012 Olympics, the previous Olympics, 2004 Olympics, get the right year. And the language that is used around female athletes is overly sexualized and infantilized. Women are referred to as girls, and women clinch titles, whereas men claim titles. Women are patronized regarding their achievements. Oh, didn't they do well? Men are celebrated for their achievements. So this language that is used around women in the media often relegates them to sexual creatures and essentially girls, children. And this is particularly apparent in classic Disney. Not so much modern Disney. Disney has taken on board the fact that there was a problem and they have improved. But if we look at some of the classic Disney princesses, their identities, who they are, is sexualized and sexually commodified in order to make them achievable. Snow White is a threat to another woman, so she's killed. And her only asset to herself is her beauty. The prince knows nothing of Snow White until he wakes her up with a kiss. So sexual activity without consent. Sleeping Beauty is betrothed at birth. She is engaged or set to marry a certain person at birth in order to solidify the political power of her family. She is also killed by another woman out of spite, and again she is saved with a kiss that is not consensual. Jasmine, another one who had to marry for political reasons, against her will. She didn't want to do it. Her reluctance causes her embarrassment for her family. She's then enslaved and has to be saved. Ariel has to change her entire appearance and lose her voice in order to get a man. And Belle is Stockholm Syndrome. She falls in love with her kidnapper. So throughout this classic Disney, into the early 90s of Disney, the lead characters of their movies, of their animations, were sexualized commodities. Their whole worth was about their beauty and about their worthiness as a wife, rather than what they had to say and what they had to offer. Now let's move on to talk about how women are omitted from the media. So here, omission means left out. So it's not that women don't appear in the media at all. They do, but they are massively underrepresented in media output. So we're talking about what media is put out there. Martinson and L in 2012 pointed out that very few media stories are about women's achievement, expertise, or abilities outside of the home or motherhood. So whenever you have a story about a woman, it tends to talk about their ability or expertise as a mother or a wife or a homemaker. You very rarely get women who are experts. And this position, this has been backed up by other studies. Cochrane in 2011 did an analysis of Radio 4 reporters and guests, and over 84% of them in the previous year were men. Packer in 2015 did an analysis of the 2012 Olympics, and only 4.5% of the coverage was women-only events. So we're not talking about joint events where like mixed doubles and things like that, but women-only events were covered 4.5% of all the coverage. In 2023, Rodriguez did a study of the experts that were brought on to news programs in order to share expertise or talk about expertise, and only 20% were women. And in 2021, Aleui, I'm probably horribly mispronouncing that, did a study across 114 countries and looked at their media and saw that women comprise of only 24% of the people we read about, see, or hear from in the media. So that we're talking almost 3/4 of the media we consume is male dominated. So women don't exist as the primary character, as the primary focus of the story. They're there as in the background, they're there as the support, but they're not the primary character or focus. Now, the third part of symbolic annihilation theory is condemnation. And what we're talking about here is the depiction of women in a negative light, often portraying them as inferior, evil, or as possessing negative traits to reinforce societal norms and stereotypes. So when women break societal norms and stereotypes, it's not, yay, go them, it's, that's bad. So, for example, when you have a career-focused woman, they tend to be put forward as a bitch or hard-nosed or not very nice. For example, Meryl Streep's character in The Devil Wears Prada. Women who are childless are seen as defective. This was a relatively recent film that came out starring Diana Aragon, who was sent to a facility because she was worried because she didn't have a maternal instinct and she didn't feel the need to have children. There was no biological clock ticking, hence the name of the film. And she goes to this facility to find out what's wrong with her. Society doesn't accept or is is changing, but slowly, accepting women who choose not to be mothers. You've also got this perpetuation about single women, that if a woman is single, actually she really wants to be in a relationship, or if she is single and happily single, she must be a slut. Okay, we saw it with Sex in the City, with this film How to Be Single, in most rom-coms or films in some way where you have a single woman, she really wants to be in a relationship. Again, giving her that characterization, that focus of must find a person. And finally, in order to be successful, women need to take on male characteristics. Arya and Sansa Stark in Game of Thrones, they were strong, independent women, but only because they took on male traits. Only because they took on male characteristics of being emotionless and hard and singularly focused, particularly in the case of Arya. But their success wasn't linked to their femininity, wasn't linked to them as women. It was because they forgo their femininity in order to take on masculine traits, and then they could be successful. Particularly in the case of Sansa, where we see her in the first few seasons where she is the idealized little princess who's marrying the king and everything's kind of almost Disney's princess like, and then she ends up in an abusive relationship, and that creates this masculinity within her, and foregoing her femininity in order for her to be successful and become the leader of the North. So we see this kind of representation of women isn't particularly positive, but there are sociologists who argue that the media is now empowering women. This traditional view of women is changing, and the media is now empowering women more. So David Gauntlet argues that 21st century media is aimed at young women, and not just aimed at them, but aimed at them in a way to make them empowered, to showing them through things like a Girl campaign that Always Sanitary Towels did, and Just a Girl, and all of those campaigns, media campaigns, are saying to girls now, it's sort of like, you don't have to be the wife and the mother. You can do your own thing. You can be your own person. You can be tough, independent, and look good doing it. So the modern media is shaping girls into this you can have it all idea. And we've also got Green and Singleton, who say that the new media, the internet, is a feminine technology. It's allowing women to explore and subvert traditional gender identities. It's led to the creation of hashtags like a girl, me too, everyday sexism. There's an entire hashtag called gendered cheese, and it started with somebody who wanted to understand why it was that Baby Bell felt it necessary to have pink wrappers for girls' lunchboxes and boys' wrappers for boys' lunchboxes when they're selling cheese. It's the same cheese in the wrapper. And what's wrong with having the red Baby Bell wrapper? Why does boys and girls need to have separate packaging? And then you've got things like the pink tax, where certain female products will cost you more. Razors, for example. A pack of 6 men's Bic razors is cheaper than a pack of 6 female pink razors. So this idea, and people are sharing these ideas and raising their voice against this everyday sexism that's being perpetuated. But as much as these initiatives and these are trying to push this empowerment of women, there is still this kind of like, you can have it all, and if you don't, you're not successful. If you don't, you're a bad woman. You're not womaning very well. And with new media, yes, it's allowing women to subvert traditional identities, but when women do this, they're then subjected to internet trolling. Carol Vorderman, who has been speaking out about the government and various other things at the moment, is getting death threats, and she's getting people tweeting her, telling her to do harm to herself, or that she needs to be sexually assaulted to stop her talking, that she doesn't know what she's talking about. I mean, the woman is a PhD in mathematics. I think she knows what she's talking about when it comes to economics, but because she's a woman, she must not know what she's talking about. So as much as things are changing, there is still that attitude towards women, you need to stay in your lane. So let's move on and talk about men and male representation in the media. Now, there is very little study in this particular area. There's been a lot of focus on women's representation, not so much on men. But there was a study done in 2020 called If He Can See It, He Will Be It, which looked specifically at representations of masculinity in television that is aimed at boys. Okay, so we're talking TV shows that have a specific male demographic. And what they found was in these shows that male characters were less likely to show emotions than females. They were stereotypically angry emotions, stoic. They're not showing empathy or happiness or silliness. They tend to be this stereotypical, this is how men should behave. They're more likely to show that boys take risks, that boys are risk takers, that they are adventurers and they are going out and they're doing all these things. That they are more likely to be both perpetrators and victims of violence. That the way to solve your problems is through violence. And also, these boys' characters are less likely to have their parents on screen. We're not saying that they don't have parents. The characters may have parents, but they're not really part of the show. And this was backed up by another study, which was Tough Guys 2. There was a previous iteration of this, and it was updated by Jackson Katz, who argued that the media that boys are receiving, both subliminally and more obviously, is that they are reinforcing violent, sexist and homophobic ways of thinking. So the media is creating a kind of toxic masculinity around what it means to be a man. So what is that common stereotype of men in the media? Now, McNamara in 2006 said that the common stereotypes that we see of men in the media often show men in a demonized way. They're showing media representations of masculinity in a very negative way. So what are those stereotypes that are creating this negative stereotype of masculinity? The first is self-sufficiency, that men should be able to do it themselves. They shouldn't have to ask for help. That they should act tough. That they should be strong, and that they shouldn't show emotion. That they are the experts. That they, as a man, are more expert than any other person in that field. That they should be physically attractive. Now, we could say that that's both for men and women, but it is. But there's a difference in that physicality of attractiveness and what it means to be attractive. That there is a heterosexuality and a homophobia to this. That you shouldn't be gay. That you shouldn't be that you should be hypersexual, and as well. So it's sort of like men are judged on their sexual prowess. Men should. That there is an aggression and a control around what it means to be a man. You need to be aggressive, but you need to be in control of that aggression. You shouldn't lose your temper. And when men are shown in a more stereotypically female traits, it's usually for comedic value. When we see things like Daddy Daycare, Mrs. Doubtfire, the pacifier, when men take on those childcare responsibilities, those domestic responsibilities, it's usually done for comedic value. It's usually done to show their incapability with those roles, rather than showing men within those roles who are actually able to do it. They are able to look after their children. They are able to cook and clean and do domestic labor. But when they do consistently, men are shown as being incapable of doing this, perpetuating the myth that men can't do domestic labor. Think back to your work on families and households here and domestic division of labor. So the representation of men is still quite toxic masculinity. But Gauntlet argues that there is a shift, and particularly in men's magazines, where we're seeing a growing number of men's magazines which are looking at mental health and well-being, looking at personal grooming and cooking and things like that. And there has been a huge decline in the lads mags with have some almost pornographic elements to them, like Nuts and Penthouse. They're almost becoming obsolete. They're going out of business because men are not buying them. Finally, we'll look at media representations of non-binary and transgender characters and people. Now, generally, transgender and non-binary have become much more visible since 2014, but that representation is still problematic and overly simplistic. In 2009, research was carried out asking British trans people how they felt about the portrayal of the trans community and non-binary community and LGBTQA+ community within the media, and 78% said that it was inaccurate or highly inaccurate. So how is it that these communities, these people, are being represented? Well, quite often, being trans or non-binary, for these characters, it's their whole identity. There's nothing else to it. It's just who they are. They're trans. It doesn't. They're not anything else. They're not musical or good at cooking or a family orientated or anything like that. They're trans. They're non-binary. That's everything you need to know, and that's all you need to know about that person. They're often used for comedic value as well. There is a very problematic representation within Little Britain. Now, that TV programme in and of itself is highly problematic in a number of levels, for disability, for gender, for ethnicity, for a whole range of other issues. But one of the characters they had were two trans women who were portrayed in a way that was kind of, these are delusional men who think they can pass off as women. They would dress in Edwardian style clothing but still had full facial hair. They would constantly use the phrase, "but I'm a lady," to kind of perpetuate it, and it was all done for comedic value. Trans and non-binary people are often relegated to the supporting role. Now, we are seeing a change, and there are more and more trans and non-binary characters and people who are taking on leading roles in TV and movies. But that leads us back to that first point. When they are in these roles, it's all about the fact that they are trans or non-binary, that they are in this role, rather than that just being, well, they happen to be trans or non-binary. They're hypersexualized. We often see them as having multiple partners, that they're trolling around for one-night stands and things like that, which is not necessarily true. There is a tragic narrative to them, the struggle of being trans or non-binary, that they must have mental health problems because they're trans or non-binary. There's a tokenism. Look at how diverse we are. We have a trans character or we have a non-binary character as part of our show or as part of our cast. And they're often, particularly trans characters, are often portrayed as being deceptive, that they are hiding their trans status from other people, that they are lying to those around them. So again, this kind of representation of non-binary and transgender characters tends to be quite negative and problematic. They are not very often seen as well fleshed out, well-rounded characters because their entire existence is based around their trans or non-binary status. So why is it? Why do these representations persist? So let's look at the theoretical perspectives of why this occurs. Well, first of all, the feminists. Of course, we've got to go with the feminists. They're the ones who've done the majority of the studies on gender representation in the media. And they say that the media is a major player in gender role socialization. It is where we learn what it means to be male and female. We learn this socialization not through being told necessarily, but more through imitation of what we see. So the way that we see men, women, trans and non-binary people portrayed in the media, that's how we feel that's what we're essentially being told you should behave like. Now, the liberal feminists argue that there is a cultural lag in the media, that they're not showing current social attitudes towards these representations, and that is because there is a lack of representation in media creation in general, and particularly in the top jobs. A recent survey found that only 30% of the top jobs in the media, so we're talking editors, creators, directors, studio heads, label executives, are female. So there's not that representation there in order to get a changing representation. The radical feminists talk about how these perpetual myths are used to dupe women into a beauty myth, to make women believe that they're constantly not good enough, which then causes them to go out and buy stuff. And which leads into the links to the Marxist feminists. But they're also led to believe that if you're pretty, you'll be happy. And this beauty, this idea of what it means to be beautiful, is a predefined characteristic. So women are told, if you want to be happy, you need to look like this. You need to be skinny, but not too skinny. You need to be tall, and you need to have impeccable makeup and hair and all of this sort of stuff. The postmodernist Gauntlet says, well, actually, the media is challenging traditional definitions and encouraging a diverse masculine and feminine identities, that the media provides us with a window into other ideas on what it means to be masculine and feminine, rather than perpetuating a particular stereotype. Now, as you can imagine, the Marxists go down the consumerist route, and in particular the Marxist feminists, where the media is about profit. They're companies, they're not charities, they're there to make money. So particularly women's representation, but all representations, create a false need. They tell, and that links back to this beauty myth, or that, and this can be applied to men as well, I guess, in that they're told you need to look like this. That draws in advertisers because the programming is telling them they need to look like this. Let's put an advert on for something that can make them look like this. So it's about profit. But the pluralists kind of argue against this. They kind of say that this whole idea of symbolic annihilation underestimates women's ability to see through gender stereotyping. That women are not passive recipients of media messages. And we will look at the media messaging and audience effects in a later unit, but women are not gullible, and are able to kind of go, well, it's fiction, it's not reality, we know this is not the case. And they do say that the media is reflecting social attitudes. So when and you can kind of look here about the rise of the neo-traditional housewife, and how we've seen an increase in television shows and movies where women are taking on those traditional female housewife mother roles. And I mean, there's been a number of films and TV shows based around the 1950s, and there's what the new right would consider the glory age of gender role identity. So it is up to you really whether you believe that the media is perpetuating these problematic gender role ideas, or whether it is that they're just reflecting back what we believe in society. So there we go. That was our lecture on gender representation in the media. We've covered symbolic annihilation. We've talked about women's representation, men's representation, and the representation of trans and non-binary people. And we've also looked at why these are perpetuated, or why these exist within the media from a theoretical perspective viewpoint.